On the quiet Sunday of the 20th of March, 1977, 16-year-old Dawn Momara told her mother she was heading out to meet friends at Ala Moana Center, a shopping mall just a short ride from their Honolulu home. She had received a phone call from an unknown male earlier that morning but said nothing seemed off. Her mother watched her walk out the door, not knowing it would be the last time she'd see her daughter alive. Dawn never made it home that day. By the following morning, McKinley High School, where she was a sophomore, was buzzing not with the usual chatter of returning students, but with shock and horror. The body of Dawn Momara had been found on the second floor of the school's English building just before Monday morning classes began. Former Hawaii lawmaker Suzanne Chun Oakland was a 15-year-old student at McKinley High that year. She remembers the strange, solemn atmosphere that morning. "I don't know how we got word of it, but everything spread really quickly," she said. Though she didn't know Dawn personally, the brutal crime left a lasting impact on her and many others at the school. "I was just really sad," she said. "I think for our student body, of course, there's that concern. What if he's still out there and he does it to somebody else?" Dawn's body was found partially clothed, lying on her back, with an orange cloth tied tightly around her neck. A subsequent autopsy confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. It was a horrifying discovery for both the school and the wider community. Among those struggling to process the horror was McKinley's band teacher, 28-year-old Grant Okamura. Dawn's younger sister was one of his flute players. That morning, she arrived at school unaware of her sister's death. Okamura remembered watching as she was called to the office, then returned to the band room, shattered. "The other students were trying to console her," he said. "At that point, I couldn't have band. How do you have a class?" She just sat there crying. She wouldn't return for weeks. Dawn, by all accounts, was kind and quiet. Okamura remembered occasionally letting her into the band room to wait in the air conditioning for her sister. The campus didn't forget her. Even those who didn't know her felt her loss deeply. That week, McKinley High School students and teachers organized a candlelight vigil on campus. Hundreds gathered outside the very building where she'd been found. They held flickering candles and listened as pastors, faculty, and friends remembered Dawn. Her absence was palpable. In a place built for growth and hope, it felt like innocence had been stolen. In the wake of the crime, investigators acted swiftly. Witnesses reported seeing a maroon and white Pontiac sedan parked near the school's English building the night before Dawn was found. A man had been seen standing beside it. Police combed the area, stopping similar vehicles and canvassing the neighborhood with photos of Dawn, asking if anyone had seen her that Sunday. It remained unclear whether she ever actually reached the Ala Moana Center where she claimed she was meeting friends. Despite these efforts, no arrests were made. Police had collected a DNA sample from Dawn's clothing, but the technology of the time couldn't produce a match. The trail went cold, and Dawn's name became another tragic entry in the annals of unsolved cases. That hope began to stir again in 2019, when Honolulu's cold case unit asked a forensic biology team to re-examine evidence, including Dawn's underwear. By 2020, an updated DNA profile had been developed from that material. Then, in 2023, police were led to two new persons of interest, Gideon Castro and his brother William, both of whom had been interviewed shortly after Dawn's death in 1977. Gideon had met Dawn at a school dance before graduating from McKinley High in 1976. William, too, said he had spoken to her on the phone occasionally but denied having any type of relationship. At the time, neither had been considered suspects beyond their brief interviews. By late 2023, investigators traveled to Chicago, where William was living. They secretly obtained DNA from one of his adult children, but the results excluded him. A similar process was conducted with Gideon's adult children in Utah. This time, the DNA matched. On the 21st of January, 2025, nearly 48 years after Dawn's murder, 66-year-old Gideon Castro was arrested at his nursing home in Mill Creek, Utah. He had lived a full life, graduated from high school, served in the Army Reserves, grown old. All the while, he had carried a secret darker than anyone could have imagined. On behalf of the Honolulu Police Department, "I want to thank all the individuals and agencies that made today's arrest possible," said Lieutenant Dina Thoems. "Thank you for all your dedication and commitment to the tireless pursuit of justice for Dawn and the Momara family." Former students like Suzanne Chun Oakland, now decades into public service and advocacy work, expressed both sorrow and relief. She said Dawn's story stayed with her through the years, influencing her work as a state senator and as a board member of Hawaii's Sex Abuse Treatment Center. "I think the community in general, and our elected officials, they know the importance of trying to preserve the evidence that can someday be able to see justice for that individual or individuals," she said. Kara Porter, co-founder of the Utah Cold Case Coalition, emphasized the critical role DNA testing now plays in bringing justice to long cold cases. "There is not enough money to do DNA testing on all cold cases," she said, "but when it can be done, it's very reliable." She noted that suspects often carry their secrets for decades, sometimes deteriorating under the weight of guilt, and sometimes not at all. Some people live life as if nothing happened. They excuse it with, "I was young," or "I was drunk," but it doesn't erase the crime. Castro waived his right to fight extradition during a video appearance from a hospital bed in Salt Lake City. But just weeks later, the long-awaited trial hit an unexpected snag. Honolulu prosecutors announced in March 2025 that they would not yet proceed with charges due to complications involving a key material witness and the condition of the evidence. Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Kelsey Guerra stressed that this was not the end. "This is just a temporary setback," she said. "We remain fully committed to continuing our efforts to prosecute this matter in the near future." Nonetheless, an Utah judge ordered Castro's release on the 12th of March. He walked free the next day. For Dawn's family, it was another wound. To come so close and watch it slip away again was almost too much to bear. But the investigation had revived something just as vital as a courtroom conviction: the truth. The silence was broken. Dawn was no longer just a name on a cold case list. She was a girl remembered, a life honored, and a victim whose case was finally seen for what it was: a tragedy that demanded accountability. Today, her story lives on in those who continue to seek justice, not just for her, but for all victims whose lives were stolen before their time. The candles lit for her nearly 5 decades ago may have dimmed, but the memory of Dawn Momara still burns in the hearts of those who knew her and those who refused to let her be forgotten. For nearly a quarter of a century, a tragic crime in Fort Pierce, Florida, remained unsolved, hanging over the community like a dark cloud. It began with a fire that ravaged a home, and in its aftermath, 2 lives were lost. The victims, Robert Hardwick and Verice, were a couple with plans for the future, plans tragically extinguished in a moment of violence. For 23 years, the case was left to the cold hands of time, until one keychain led detectives to the truth and an arrest that would finally bring closure. It was the 22nd of October, 2000, when the fire department responded to a call of a house ablaze in the quiet area of Kings Highway, just south of Indrio Road in Fort Pierce, Florida. Inside the 2-story home of Robert and Verice, fire and smoke had taken their toll, but the horror didn't end with the flames. The bodies of Robert, 77, and Verice, 58, were found in the home after the fire had been extinguished. But what initially seemed like a simple fire was soon revealed to be much more: a carefully orchestrated murder. The couple had been stabbed to death before the fire was even set, leaving no smoke or soot in their lungs. The house had been deliberately torched, the flames perhaps meant to obliterate any trace of the killer's identity. Investigators discovered Robert's car, a white Oldsmobile Alero, was missing. It wasn't long before it was found abandoned miles away in Wilton Manors, Broward County. It would later become a key piece in solving the case. But even with the stolen car, blood evidence, and DNA samples collected from the crime scene, the case went cold. And as the years passed, so too did the leads. Robert Hardwick, a man of considerable age, had spent much of his life in Fort Pierce. A product of a generation that valued hard work and dedication, Robert had a deep connection to his local community. His background was one that reflected a deep sense of responsibility and care for those around him. Though details of his formal education are scant, those who knew him spoke of his intelligence and practical knowledge, particularly in the work he did. Robert had worked for years in various industries, earning a reputation as a hard worker, known for his diligence and attention to detail. His life had not been without hardship, but Robert had a way of persevering, using his wisdom and experience to navigate the challenges he faced. He was also deeply committed to family, and his relationship with Verice had been one of mutual love and respect. The two were planning to marry, excited about the future they would build together. Verice Reese, at 58, had lived a full life filled with love, ambition, and the pursuit of happiness. She had come from a close-knit family and was always described as kind-hearted and compassionate. Verice had pursued an education, and it was clear that she valued knowledge and personal growth. Though there was little detailed information available about her educational background, it was evident that her intellectual curiosity and practical understanding shaped her worldview. Verice worked tirelessly as a nurse for many years, and her colleagues and patients respected her for her professionalism and genuine care for others. Her decision to return home early that evening to check on Robert and bring him his medication was indicative of her nurturing nature, always thinking of others before herself. Together, Robert and Verice made a perfect pair. They were both older individuals who had found companionship later in life, and their plans to marry in October of 2000 were a reflection of their shared dream for the future. The love they had for one another was apparent to anyone who knew them, and the loss of these two kind souls sent shockwaves through the community. Fast forward 23 years to 2023, when Detective Paul Taylor of the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office revisited the case with a fresh perspective. Unlike the initial investigation, which had been hampered by a lack of cooperation from witnesses, this time Detective Taylor had something that could change everything. Advancements in forensic science and new witnesses who were now willing to talk. Among the evidence collected from the car that had been stolen from the crime scene, investigators found something odd yet crucial: a keychain. It seemed insignificant at first, a simple trinket with a photo of a young girl. But when the keychain was traced back to the suspect, it became the missing link the case desperately needed. The girl in the photo was none other than the suspect's daughter, a detail that would soon crack open the case. At the time of the fire, no one could have imagined that this small object would carry the weight of an entire investigation. Yet it did. And when Detective Taylor shared this discovery with the state attorney, even the most seasoned legal minds were taken aback. I think even the state attorney, when I told him about this keychain, he was like, "You've got to be kidding me. Come to my office right now," Taylor recalled. The man at the center of this case was Julian Antonio Romero, a 58-year-old Honduran national. Romero, already serving a life sentence for assault and kidnapping in Broward County, had been living under the radar of law enforcement for years. He had been arrested in 2002, serving time for an unrelated crime, but the connection to Robert and Verice was never made until 2023. Romero's DNA was found at the crime scene. His genetic profile matched samples taken from both the house and the stolen car. But there was more to the story. Witnesses had come forward, sharing information about Romero's presence in the area around the time of the murders. One of the most significant pieces of information came from Robert's longtime employee, who revealed an eerie encounter just a day before the murder. On the day before the murders, Robert had mentioned hearing someone downstairs in his home. When he investigated, he found a Hispanic man wandering in his garage. Romero, as it turned out, had claimed that his truck had broken down. Robert's employee, who had been at the scene, gave Romero a ride to a nearby store. They spoke briefly, but something about the interaction didn't sit right with Robert. Investigators soon learned that Robert and Verice had returned home after dinner on the night of the murders. Robert was getting ready to go to bed, and Verice was about to head out to a birthday party. However, just before leaving, Verice returned inside to give Robert his medication. It was then that she made one last phone call to a family member, telling them that she had overheard Robert arguing with another man upstairs. The line was suddenly cut off. Detectives believe that when Robert tried to defend himself, Possibly reaching for his gun, Romero attacked. Robert was likely stabbed in the bedroom, while Verice was murdered at the top of the stairs. After both victims had been slain, Romero set the house on fire, hoping to destroy any evidence of his crime. The fire, although destructive, wasn't enough to cover the tracks of his brutal actions. Blood evidence and DNA from the crime scene, coupled with the keychain and Romero's past, would ultimately lead to his downfall. Romero's arrest came not from the fire itself, but from a chilling detail. When he was found sleeping in Robert's stolen car, investigators uncovered a can of pepper spray inside the vehicle. The pepper spray, along with a bloody fingerprint that matched Robert's provided the final pieces of the puzzle. Romero's attempt to steal the car had escalated into a violent confrontation, one that ended in murder. In Romero's defense, he claimed he had merely climbed into the car to nap, but Detective Taylor didn't buy it. "If you were climbing in there to take a nap for a couple hours," he asked, "why would you take the keys out of the ignition and put your daughter's picture on it?" The keychain, ignored for so long, was now a central piece of the case. Detectives identified the girl in the photo as Romero's daughter. That, combined with DNA and witness testimony, was the final break investigators needed. In January 2025, after months of painstaking investigation, Julian Romero was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. At the time of his arrest, Romero was already serving a life sentence for unrelated crimes. But now, his connection to the 2000 double slaying was undeniable. St. Lucie County Sheriff Richard Del Toro praised the work of his team, noting how fresh eyes on a cold case can often uncover what was once missed. "I think it's so important to realize that when a fresh set of eyes gets on these cases, you can see things that weren't seen before." For Detective Taylor, the breakthrough was bittersweet. "It's fantastic. It's a great feeling," he said. "This is a double slaying, and it's 25 years old, and now we have answers." While the investigation has finally led to justice for Robert and Verice, it doesn't erase the pain that their families endured. Their lives were taken in an act of senseless violence, but the truth is now out, and the killer has been brought to justice. The case of Robert Hardwick and Verice Reese serves as a reminder that no matter how long a case goes unsolved, justice has a way of finding its way through the cracks. With new evidence, new technology, and the tenacity of those who refuse to let the truth remain buried, even the coldest cases can be cracked open. And for Robert and Verice's family, at least now, the fire has finally burned out and their story can be told. In the late 1880s, London's Whitechapel district was gripped by terror as a string of brutal crimes shook the city to its core. 5 women's lives were ended in a manner so savage that it left the world reeling and questioning the identity of the perpetrator for over a century. Known only as Jack the Ripper, the killer's identity remained a chilling enigma, evading capture despite exhaustive investigations. Between 1888 and 1891, the deaths of 11 women were linked under a single investigation known as the Whitechapel Murders. These crimes bore similar traits: throats slashed, bodies mutilated, and victims all drawn from London's most vulnerable communities. Yet it was 5 specific murders, committed between August and November 1888, that displayed such distinct brutality and signature traits that police believed they were the work of one man. That man was never identified, but the fear he inspired carved a permanent scar in the city's collective memory. Years later, hidden within old police documents, a name surfaced: Kosminsky. That single word, scribbled in marginal notes and police memos, would become central to a theory that endures to this day. Investigators eventually connected it to a real individual, Aaron Mordecai Kosminsky, a troubled man who, some believe, may have been Jack the Ripper. Born on the 11th of September, 1865, in the Polish town of Kłodawa, then under Russian rule, Aaron Kosminsky was the son of a tailor, Abram Josef Kosminsky, and his wife, Gula Lubnowska. He grew up in a Jewish family during a time of political instability and social unrest. While little is known about his early life, it is speculated he may have worked in a hospital before emigrating to London with his family in the 1880s. By the time the Whitechapel murders occurred, Aaron was living either on Providence Street or Greenfield Street, both within walking distance of the murder scenes. His proximity to the crimes would later become a focal point of suspicion. Kosminsky's mental health declined rapidly in the late 1880s. He exhibited signs of paranoia, auditory hallucinations, and severe self-neglect. In 1891, his erratic behavior, reportedly including threatening a woman with a knife, led to his commitment at Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum. A year later, he brandished a chair at an attendant, one of the only documented incidents of violence during his lifetime. During his confinement, Kosminsky spoke almost exclusively in Yiddish, raising doubts about his fluency in English, a factor some historians argue weakens the theory that he could have engaged in the calculated conversations Jack the Ripper may have used to lure victims. Despite the lack of formal charges, several senior officials considered Kosminsky a serious suspect. In an 1894 memorandum, Sir Melville Macnaghten, Assistant Chief Constable of the Metropolitan Police, described a Polish Jew with strong homicidal tendencies who hated women. Chief Inspector Donald Swanson also mentioned in private notes that a witness had identified Kosminsky but refused to testify, allegedly due to shared religious background. Instead of charging him, police surveillance continued until his eventual commitment. In 1894, Kosminsky was transferred to Leavesden Asylum, where he spent the rest of his life. There were no further incidents of violence, and he died quietly in 1919, long forgotten by a city that once feared a phantom killer. But Kosminsky's name never disappeared completely. It lingered in shadows, whispers in police archives, footnotes in ripperology books, until one peculiar item reawakened the world's interest. In 2014, author Russell Edwards reignited global intrigue when he claimed to have solved the case using modern forensic science. The key? A shawl allegedly found at the scene of Catherine Eddowes' murder, the fourth canonical Ripper victim. Edwards purchased the item at auction and sent it for analysis by Dr. Jari Louhelainen, a molecular biologist. Louhelainen extracted mitochondrial DNA from stains on the shawl, comparing them to known descendants of both Eddowes and Kosminsky's sister. The results, he claimed, were a match, and proof. He argued that Kosminsky was at the scene. The media lit up with headlines, "Ripper identified," yet many scientists were unconvinced. Mitochondrial DNA is not unique, passed down maternally and shared by thousands. Critics pointed out methodological flaws, the lack of peer review, and questioned the shawl's chain of custody, which stretched back over 100 years with no official documentation. To address skepticism, follow-up testing was done in 2019 by Liverpool John Moores University and the University of Leeds. These studies also claimed a genetic match to descendants of both Aaron and Catherine. Still, concerns lingered over the significance of shared mtDNA, prompting renewed debate. Then, in 2025, the conversation escalated again. A peer-reviewed paper titled "Forensic Investigation of a Shawl Linked to the Jack the Ripper Crimes," published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, stated that DNA found on the shawl matched samples from living descendants of both Aaron and Catherine. Russell Edwards publicly urged the Attorney General to allow proceedings to reopen the case in court, declaring, "We now know the name, and we have placed the perpetrator at the crime scene." Whether Aaron Kosminsky was truly Jack the Ripper or merely a vulnerable man swept into infamy by fear and coincidence remains one of criminal history's most persistent mysteries. His name has sparked books, debates, documentaries, and forensic re-evaluations, yet no legal determination has ever been made. The murders of 1888 left behind no fingerprints, no footage, and no confessed killer. All that remains are wounds, both literal and historical. But the story of Aaron Kosminsky continues to challenge our understanding of guilt, mental illness, and justice. His life, lived mostly in silence and obscurity, is now forever tethered to one of the darkest legends the world has ever known.